Hi everybody, my name is Luz Vargas and now I'm going to talk about Dojo Toolkit. Okay, what is Dojo Toolkit? Dojo Toolkit is, as the name says, it's a toolkit and it's basically a JavaScript library, JavaScript toolkit that allows us to create web applications that use Ajax, that use HTML5, CSS3, and uh, Dojo use List as preprocessor for CSS3. Um, okay, so Dojo is divided in four different parts. The first one is Dojo, that contains the the core. Basically, contains require, contains stuff like that. And Digit is the one that contains is the package that contains all the widgets and all the layouts. And Dojo contains the experimental modules. That's why the X at the end, Dojo experimental. That's as are experimental, they are not completely considered stable. So, and there is also Dojo util. This one includes the build tools. This build tool is in charge of processing the JavaScript files and HTML5 and CSS files, and in fact not CSS, list files, and converting those files into minified versions, and also create documentation, create state checking, and also make testing for Dojo. What version have Dojo? A version begins with version 0.1 in 2005, August 2005. Like from now, we are in 2014. It was like 10 years ago. The last stable version that is currently working is the 1.93, which just released like 2 or 3 months ago in February of this year. And hopefully the new version 2.0 is going to be soon, so I hope for that version also. What about the critics? Everything is good. It's a great framework, but it has been criticized a lot of time before. The loading time. Before version 1.7, loading time was too long because it uses a function called Dojo require and was a synchronized function instead of an asynchronous. That is today. Today use something called AMD modules, which is asynchronous module definition. But before it doesn't use like that. This asynchronous module definition is a lot used by require.js. I think it was proposed as a standard for JavaScript, but it's mostly a convention framework than a framework basically. People say, okay, new versions 1.8 and 1.9 are faster in that way in loading time. Also, people say that documentation is pretty bad, and I am agree with that. For sure, before version 1.8, the documentation was so bad, and right now documentation is better, but I think that it still is bad. And not only the problem is not that it's only bad. They also have the problem that documentation is confusing also because they mix too many terms sometimes and too many ways of programming. Other critics is that learning cube is too difficult, too high, and that's logic because as the creator says, Dojo is a huge library, a huge toolkit in comparison with jQuery is just a tiny library. So you're going to learn jQuery in just in question of days, while you're going to learn Dojo in question of months. But after learning Dojo, you're going to get you're not going to want to come back to jQuery or other stuff like that. Other critics are the API stability. For example, version 1.7 are not fully compatible with version before. That's okay to me because it means that it was a great change for performance. Something wrong, something that they were making wrong. Now it's correct, so uh, that's why I like it. So I'm going to make a little comparison with other frameworks. And I'm going to begin with the pattern. I'm going to compare Dojo with EXJS, Angular, Knockout.js, and jQuery. What parent they use? Dojo use an MVC parent. Some of the MVC stuff is still experimental, and you are going to find them in the Dojo's package. But most of them are already good and are great. So EXJS use MVC parent, and it's a great framework. I love it. And AngularJS, it's also a great framework. It's mostly a library more than a framework. And they use the concept of model view whatever, which can be model view controller and model view model. What's the point, what's the difference between them? It's basically the way of programming. I prefer MVC instead of MVVM. And Knockout.js use MVVM, model view model. And finally jQuery, which is the most popular, doesn't use any kind of MVC parent. In fact, AngularJS and Knockout.js uses or are most of the time are used together with jQuery, AngularJS plus jQuery and Knockout plus jQuery, which to me is okay, but I don't like the idea of having too many things that I need to match. I don't like that. And the UI, the UI in Dojo is an excellent UI. I don't have too much to say about that. Maybe the only problem is that the UI in Dojo is 50% programmed in HTML and 50% in JavaScript. Also, although you can program 100% in JavaScript in Dojo, most of the time you are going to find code that is not coding in HTML way. Sorry, in JavaScript completely. And most of the documentation is also written in that way, 50 HTML and 50 JavaScript, which I don't like too much because HTML is an ugly way of writing code, and that's why you are going to find a model view whatever and model view model. They also use a lot of HTML code, and jQuery also use or needs a lot of HTML code. But EXJS was created completely in JavaScript, and you only need they use HTML, but only in the bottom of the library. You don't see HTML anymore, you only see JavaScript, and that's why I love that framework, because it's I don't need to worry about anything about HTML, which sometimes can be difficult to handle, principally because the cross-browser compatibility, which you are going to have a lot with AngularJS and Knockout.js, since they use a lot of HTML, and of course with jQuery you are going to have that also. What preprocessor they use for CSS? In Dojo they use List. At the beginning I thought that they use CSS directly, but that's illogic. But they use List, and they have four styles, four principal styles. One of the most popular is called Claro, and also EXJS use Sass. The difference between List and Sass are too tiny, So not tiny, it's basically a different language. So both have advantage and both have disadvantage, and I'm not. It's just a question of taste. AngularJS, since AngularJS doesn't have an UI by default, that means they need a third-party UI, and that can change for the UI. For example, uh, Angular UI, which is one of the most popular for Angular, is based on Bootstrap, and Bootstrap is created using List, and they are also libraries in SAS, and I think that Stylus is another. So it can vary, and the problem is that with the UI is that the UI is I say that it's medium. This is purely my opinion, because I say that it's medium because it's not 100 compatible with everything. For example, new version of AngularJS, it's doubly compatible with previous version, so sometimes you need to wait after they also update Angular UI, which is not a not updated at the same time, while Dojo and EXJS both update the UI at the same time. And Knockout.js also use Bootstrap most of the time as UI, but they also use other UI. The same for jQuery. jQuery can use or can be used together with Bootstrap, although they also have the UI. So that's why I didn't put in a specific CSS per processor. Dojo also can be has some libraries called the Bootstrap, which is the theme, and it's programming in style. I think I don't remember exactly the name. And now, something interesting about that JavaScript doesn't have is the concept of classes, the concept of inheritance, the concept of overriding, the concept of importing or including. In that case, Dojo and EXJS has that by default, and that's in Dojo. It's called Dojo require to do the importing of library, while in in EXJS you need to do an exe create, and then inside the exe create you call the libraries that this one inherit. So in Dojo they use define. They use also one important thing that is called declare for creating classes, and which is similar to the EXJS declare also. I think that is declare. I'm not completely sure. Maybe this is wrong. Um, Inside any method you can call this the parent method, just doing this inherit, and in EXJS you do that using this call parent. You can do that also in EXJS doing this called overriding when you are overriding a method, but I think that that's deprecated, and you should use this parent. This one is the parent that you should use, while in Dojo you should use this inherit. AngularJS doesn't have any of this stuff, neither Knockout, neither jQuery. They need uh, a library called require.js, the three of them, to achieve something similar. Even it's similar, it's not quite as good as those two. For example, if you use your require.js, you cannot create a function and call the create an object, and inside this object create a method, and inside this method call the parent method to create an overriding. And that's something you can do that in JavaScript, but using pure JavaScript, which is called also monkey parent, and it's a bad practice doing that. You should avoid doing that. That's why I like those two frameworks, because they give you something to do that. Um, Something important about the framework or about the UI, and that's why I put it as a line, a comparison line, is that the grid. What about the grid? The grid to me is the most important element in development because 90% of the application has grids in any business application. Uh, in Dojo, it has a many type of grids. I'm just going to show you four. Those data grid and enhanced data grid are the previous grid that Dojo used. And now they are saying that you should use the grid and grid X, which are the new versions, like we can say. Um, since I think that the grid and grid X are not fully compatible or with Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer 8 I think is the lower version that they support, but I think that supporting Internet Explorer 6 is a crazy thing because nobody is using it anymore. So, and also I think that the version that should be supported for Internet Explorer should be the version 10 at the most, but that's going to depend on the company. And EXES, which supports Internet Explorer 6, has is and Integrate doesn't support Internet Explorer. I think that the maximum version is the version 8 of Internet Explorer. And CodeGrid is a poor grid. It doesn't have many stuff. I don't like too much. I haven't used it, but it's kind of ugly. And jQuery has a lot of plugins that make grids. Most of them are ugly grids, and the two ones that I like the most are JQGrid and SlickGrid. JQGrid, the source code I have tried and it's ugly. It's horrible. And it has too many bugs. Principally because because jQuery and they code in a way that it's they the naming convention that they use inside the code is too short. So for example, in the same table they just put T, which is horrible. It's too difficult to understand and to follow. While SlickGrid is a better table, not as good as EXEGrid and those two, GGrid and GridX, and has a lot of bugs. They are repairing. If you go to the SlickGrid GitHub repository, you're going to see a lot of bugs that most of the time are solved by those two. So so basically, the end of this comparison in this view is the license. Licensing is one of the most important things to take in account. For example, Dojo use BSD and academic license. It's great because it's free and you don't need to pay anything for it. While EXES use a GPL commercial license, you need to pay it if you want to use in a commercial application, but if you don't, you can use a GPL. So that's maybe the strongest points against EXES, that Dojo is completely free while EXES is not free. But of course, to me, EXES is better than Dojo because most of the stuff that I'm going to show you later. AngularJS use MIT license, which is a free license. You can do basically whatever you want, or not whatever you want, but almost that. Knockout.js and jQuery also use MIT license. So execute in Discord. Okay, and now the documentation. As one of the critics says, documentation is now it's better. It's kind of good, but still has too many. It's too difficult to follow. They don't have too few ways of doing, or it's I don't like too much documentation because it's too confusing. Mostly because they some parts they use mostly because the different version that they have, and in different version they have different documentations, which is difficult to follow. Sometimes I get I get documentation for version 1.6, and sometimes I get for version 1.9, and I always should change to version 1.9 because right now I'm developing in that version. While the XCIS has an excellent documentation, to me is the best documentation, all of them. And AngularJS has good documentation, Knockout also good, and jQuery of course has a good documentation. Anybody can follow, or anybody can, basically any JavaScript programmer has programming in jQuery before. So the popularity. Dojo is not too popular in the community. JavaScript inside JavaScript programming. This is yes. There are charts. I'm not going to show those charts, but it's basically a low. XCS is also low popular, but it's more popular than Dojo in some aspects, in some companies, because as I said you before, you can buy the license, and since it's a buy license, it has better support, that's why it's better, because you buy it. While in Dojo you get it for free, and you should expect errors, or you should expect mistakes in some parts. So the community is basically the same. In the community in Dojo there are a lot of people, also in XJS and Knockout.js there are a lot of people, but obviously jQuery has the most people. And visual I think that AngularJS is more popular than Dojo, and also more popular than XJS, because it was created from Google, so you can imagine why people love it. What about visual editors? Dojo has two kind of visual editors, until I know, right? Because there are more it could be more visual editors. The two ones that I know is Makeda and Wavemaker, but only until version 6.7, and this version use Dojo 1.4, while Makeda use version 1.9 of Dojo. And XCS use the version, or use the visual app editor called Sencha Architect, which is great. I have used it too few, but it's a great application. And AngularJS it's now used by Wavemaker. They changed from Dojo to AngularJS. Most people criticize that because it was a big change. Most people says that it shouldn't be done, and I think that maybe it shouldn't, but they should have reason. I'm not sure why. So after version 7.0 they are going to use Wave AngularJS instead Dojo. That's why the last version that used Dojo is 6.7, sorry, and use Dojo 1.4. They even use Dojo 1.9. And Knockout.js doesn't have any real visual editor. jQuery also, although they have one for application editors. And data manipulation. What about data manipulation? Store memory Dojo they use four kind of data manipulation: store memory, store JSON rest, and store observable, store cache. As you can imagine, store memory is fully in memory, and JSON rest is the one that is in charge of sending requests to the server and getting the data. And observable is the one that you create an observable to have events every time that you save or edit the store. You can get when the store is edited. And cache is used in conjunction of those three to cache the values from the server, so that you don't need to get a new request to the server. On the other hand, EXES use only exe store. I like that most because it's only one store. You don't need to worry about four kind of libraries. And then inside this you put if this one is going to be for making Ajax requests or not, or going to be REST request, or going to be RPC request, or sub request, sorry. And they also have another thing that ext something, I don't remember exactly. And in AngularJS you have something called, they have Angular stores also, but they also have Angular resource, which is the one that is in charge of making JSON requests. And Knockout.js use ViewModel. ViewModel doesn't have even caching, even JSON requests, and you need to do that using the jQuery. So that's why Knockout.js and jQuery most of the time I use together. While using Angular, you don't need to use jQuery, but most of the time people use it because jQuery has a lot of plugins, a lot of UI, while AngularJS doesn't have too much. So what about the data view or data view binding? In Dojo they have bidirectional binding, but it's a pure. And what does that mean? Binding means that you can put in your HTML code a variable, and this variable you can put it in a template weight, and this variable, whenever this variable is updated, the HTML code is going to be updated also. AngularJS has an excellent bidirectional binding. In fact, most people say that it's the best, and that's why I think WebMaker changed from Dojo to AngularJS for the bidirectional binding. But I still think that this bidirectional binding I don't like too much. EXES doesn't have this because it's made completely in JavaScript, so they don't need bidirectional binding. And Knockout.js has also bidirectional binding, but to me it's not as good as the AngularJS binding. But this is just my opinion. And jQuery of course doesn't have data binding, data view binding. Of course they have events, but that's not data view binding. And I think that's it about comparison about Dojo. You can choose whichever you want. And now I'm going to show you something about Dojo, or mostly what is Dojo. As I said, Dojo support Internet Explorer from version 6 to 9, Firefox of course from version, and they also have they divide, or they have two types of frameworks. They have web applications for making desktop applications, and they have mobile applications. They support Apple and iPhone, Android, also BlackBerry, sorry. They also support I think they also support Windows phones, but of course Windows Phone have been bought for many people, so that's why I think they just in fact BlackBerry is going to disappear in the near future. And one of the people that sponsors Dojo are this ADP, I don't remember what does that means, VMware, E5, JP Morgan Chase, Cisco. IBM is one of the most important sponsors. Those two are one of the most important sponsors. Cypaint, which is a company, what's the name? A sibling company, and others company. If you want to see Dojo in action, you can do this Dojo sim tester. So in here you can see all the widgets that they have. One of the most impressive are the select widget, which you can do whatever formatting you want. While in the AngularJS you cannot do that. Furthermore, they have this autocompleter widget, for example Alabama, and as you can see, and this widget also can be used as with remote data using just a field JSON REST store. And of course, and they have text areas, they have this editor, they have this WYSIWYG editor, which is wonderful. I love it. And you don't need to write too much code, you just need to declare this editor and everything else is going to be done for you. You don't need to do anything else. They have a slider, this one is also wonderful. The Angular UI doesn't have these labels. If you want to see them, they don't have those labels, they don't have those what's the name, those rulers. And as you can see, they also have double, they can bind to another values. And of course they can disable progress bars, inline text editor, edit box. Oh, yeah, wonderful. I haven't seen that. They have calendars, they have ruleless trees. I haven't seen trees in AngularJS. I think they don't have. They have trees, they have alerts, they have these dialogues, what are wonderful dialogues, and mobile. Okay, other features, you can see most of the features here. As I said, it's an AMD modules, asynchronous module definition. In fact, the original require.js was written by was forked from these people, was forked from Dojo. And the documentation that is not pretty good. And all those books has a little problem that are, most of them are updated. I think that all of them are updated. Most of them are in version 1.3 or version 1.4, which is an old version. It's completely different. And community and blogs. So I hope that you enjoy these presentations. And in new presentations I'm going to create a demo application. I expect that you like it. So thank you for being there.